Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. In its biggest intervention in decades in the Middle East, Russia has launched a series of missile and air strikes in various parts of Syria, claiming that it was targeting Islamic State militants. But this has been disputed by the Pentagon, which says Russia's latest military initiative is to prop up and strengthen the beleaguered regime of Syria's dictator, Bashar al-Assad.
Since reassuming the post of Russia's president, Vladimir Putin has lost no time in addressing the geopolitical threats to Russia internationally. And now, at the center of his agenda is the explosive situation in the Middle East, most of all in Syria. President Putin has drawn a deep, hard line in the sand around the survival of the Bashar al-Assad regime. But Russia's intervention in Syria is also about Moscow preserving the port rights to Russia's only Mediterranean naval port at Tartus. In the event of a showdown with NATO, this base becomes strategically important for Russia. Russia's intervention comes at a time when a $500 million US program to train and equip 5,000 Syrian rebels to fight the Islamic State militants has ended in total failure, a fact confirmed by the New York Times. Many of these trained fighters have turned over gear, ammunition and possibly weapons to the al-Qeda-linked al-Nusra front operating in northern Syria. And US President Obama's reluctance to play a proactive role after the reversal over his Syrian chemical weapons redline in September 2013 destroyed what little credibility he had in the region, signaling perhaps that he was not an iron-willed leader. With no solution in sight to the 4-year-long war in Syria, there are now 4 million Syrians scattered throughout the region, making them the world's largest refugee population under the United Nations mandate. At this rate, the UN predicts there could be 4.27 million Syrian refugees by the end of 2015, the worst exodus since the Rwandan genocide 20 years ago.
And to look at the evolving situation, which is rather dynamic in the Middle East, we have two experts who have been looking at the region for years in great detail. Mr. Talmiz Ahmed, who has been formerly India's envoy to several countries in the Arab world and has authored, amongst others, a very, very impressive book on Islamic challenges in the region. And we have Dr. Sriram Cholia, who is the professor and dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs and an extensively read columnist in Indian papers. Mr. Ahmed, sir, my first question is that this is probably the first time, if not in decades, probably in more than a century, that American and Russian troops are so close to each other and both seem to be fighting the scourge of Islamic State and Islamic terrorists, but clearly it appears for the outsiders that the agendas are divided.
I think the situation is very complex, and I don't think any simplistic labels would be accurate. There are no American troops as of now in Syria, though there are Russian troops, it is said. There are also Iranian and Syrian troops, obviously. There is a lot of air action that is taking place, in which the Americans are also involved. Indeed, the Americans have been bombing Syria over the last 1 year without any palpable impact on the Islamic State that we can see. But I feel that this is a very significant intervention that the Russians have made. It is in line with their fundamental principle that they will not tolerate regime change because of external forces at play. And that is important for them. It is significant. It is in this context that they are defending the Assad regime. They are also equally concerned about the proliferation of jihad in Syria. It's not just the Islamic State. It is the Islamic State. There are also various affiliates of the al-Qeda. You have al-Nusra. You have got various other militant groups that are being backed by forces from the GCC countries. So it's a much more complicated scenario. The Americans are fully supportive of these assaults upon the jihadi forces. So they are caught in a bind because they want Assad to go, but they also want the Islamic forces to go as well.
Dr. Cholia, one of the criticisms of President Obama has been that after he failed to get on with his red line in Syria as far as use of chemical weapons is concerned, the American reluctance to put boots on the ground formally, as Mr. Ahmed's brought out, that there are various technical advisors and others on the ground doing all sorts of things. Apparently, a $500 million budget has been, $1 million budget has been sanctioned by the US government and the Congress to get on with this exercise of training and arming a resistance against the Islamic State and all sorts of other groups that are operating there. So do you feel that this is going to now usher in a sort of second Cold War where the dynamics of the Middle East are not going to be just dictated by Washington, but clearly Moscow wants to play a much, much bigger role than it has ever played, at least in recent memory, in the region?
I think the Americans wanted to retain a monopoly, but they have been in many ways refuted by Putin's proactive military diplomacy. What has happened is that until now, while Iran and Hezbollah were supporting the Assad regime, there wasn't really a major power which was operating in the skies other than the Western ones. So now I think the dynamic has changed. The fact that the Russians are there both on ground and in air, and President Putin has spoken of bringing in volunteers as well to fight alongside the Iranian trained guerrillas as well as the Assad's army. What we're talking about is certainly a kind of an opposition of interests, wherein the West wants Assad out at all costs. At least they want some kind of political transition, while on the other hand, Putin believes that he says he's not attached to Assad per se, but he doesn't want the state to collapse, one. And certainly, he wants to change the game by making it more balanced and making it less of a pro-Western dictated terms. For example, the no-fly zone that the West and Turkey are supposed to have come close to agreeing, all these are now in jeopardy because the Russians have intervened, which means that Assad now has a leg up once again and has a chance of sitting at the table whenever there's a political settlement with more of an equal footing.
Mr. Ahmed, sir, it's said that Russia is also, as you have brought out, concerned about the spillover effects of the impact of the Islamic State on the Caucasus region, and there are many. Some close figures are being talked by the FSB, for Russian intelligence agencies, of something like 1,700 Russian jihadis who are also involved there. Another set of figures that has come in is, apart from a barrack being built for some 2,000 Russian troops to be housed there, it is also said that Russia could be putting in something close to multiples of thousands of troops in various forms as technical advisors, as supporting troops. So clearly the conflict has now gone on to the next level after 4 years of, despite the atrocities against civilians which has led to a refugee crisis, but 4 years of a sort of stalemate having been arrived there because of US inaction. What do you foresee now as the next few steps to watch out for?
I think the Russians are quite serious about their intervention. They have brought in a lot of firepower. They are deeply concerned about the spillover effect of the Islamic State and of the other jihadi groups. They are completely fed up with this so-called stalemate. It's not much of a stalemate. There's been extraordinary destruction. We are talking about the killing of 250,000 people. Almost all the major streets, all the major cities have been destroyed. You have got 4 million refugees outside Syria and about 11 million refugees within the country. What kind of stalemate is this? This is systematic destruction. We have seen that systematically various forces in the region and beyond have been supporting militant groups for the last 4 years. The Americans have been doing so, and now the Russians have said enough is enough. We have to intervene and we have to stop all this kind of bloodletting.
Very interesting. Dr. Cholia, briefly, this is a military intervention which Washington is obviously very nervous about, because their entire exercise in the last year, year and a half, by their own official accounts and that of a serving general who was involved with it, has failed miserably. So do you think Putin has taken a risk too many by first upsetting the West in Ukraine, now taking on the West here? or this is the rise and revival of Russia's military muscle flexing era?
I think Putin is taking a risk insofar as the sustainability of a military campaign of this scale, given the economic problems at home. But I don't think he worries too much about upsetting the West, because that has been in many ways what has actually given him strength with domestic public opinion. He's extremely popular, and internationally there are a number of players. It's not just Iran and Iraq which are supporting what Russia is doing. Silently, most members of the international community, barring the pro-Western ones, would applaud, because for them it's necessary to see a sense of a balance. So while Russia cannot match the United States or China in economic might anymore, it still has considerable military firepower, and it is its strength. So I think Putin is playing to his strength by deploying it and trying to change the political dimension on the ground.
Right. Welcome back. Mr. Ahmed, we've looked up till now at Russia and the military dimension. And before I sort of get on to other issues, a quick point is that an aspect which the world has not really talked about is Russia's desire to seize at least one, if not more, military ports and bases, which will allow it to be in a good position should the conflict escalate and bring it in confrontation with NATO. Is that true?
Russia has had the naval base at Tartus for about 40 years. That is being significantly upgraded and expanded. There is a suggestion in some sections of academic writing that just in case the war against the Islamic State and the other jihadi groups is not entirely successful, at some stage President Assad and the Russians could create a substantial enclave along the western coast of Syria, which would become a major center of power for the beleaguered regime. So yes, it is quite possible. I'm not sure it will actually happen, but that is a plan B or a plan C in case plan A doesn't work.
It's said that Syria has seen the use of chemical weapons on several occasions in the last 4 years, and obviously the regime has stalled the efforts of agencies to try and get to the depth of the matter. But clearly this conflict has brought out the worst in all conflicts that we've seen in recent years: chemical weapons, a refugee crisis, humanitarian disaster which is of proportions I think even the UN can't handle. So, and some experts now say that the conflict has the fuel to last a few more years. So are we looking at all this magnifying twice over?
I hope not. I think what will happen if the Russians continue down this path is not the doomsday that the Americans are predicting, but rather some kind of a concerted effort, because now there are two coalitions, both purportedly saying that they want to counter jihadists and extremists. But the Gulf Cooperation Council and the Americans and the Turkey are on one side, and Iran, Iraq and Russia are on the other side. But if we can have a grand coalition, which President Putin has been mooting, but unfortunately has been rebuffed so far by the West, I think it's possible actually to have a concerted effort, and that will eventually put pressure on the jihadists. And frankly, even Russia has said they are not personally attached to Assad himself. So as long as the state survives and there is a transition without jihadist pockets of large pockets of jihadist influence, I think we can see a settlement. So I'm more hopeful that over the next 6 months we're going to see that the jihadists are on the run if Russia sustains this, and the Americans are now under pressure also to prove their mettle as counter-terrorism force, because now they are saying we are going to train 5,000 more Arab fighters and deploy them in Syria over the coming months on a fast-forward basis.
Mr. Ahmed, sir, I would like to ask you that how does this impact on the existing rivalries in the Arab world? It's clearly the Arab world is divided very clearly on two sides. You have the Sunni-led coalitions with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, and now you have again Iran, which is getting backed up not just by the fact that it's coming back into the world stage with the oil deal and nuclear deal the Americans have kind of gone in with, but Russia having come in, which has been an ally of Iran of sorts as far as the Syrian regime is concerned. So what do you think? I mean, I think it's a complete dilemma that the Arab regimes are up against.
The Russian intervention is a game changer. You now find this intervention is attacking many elements that were supportive of the Saudi agenda. I'm also very skeptical about the so-called Sunni front. In this Sunni front, you don't find Egypt. Egypt is opposed to regime change. It is opposed to the cohabitation that is burgeoning between Saudi Arabia and elements of the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria as well as Yemen. In the case of Turkey, they have now gone back into their shell because they have got domestic issues as far as the Kurds are concerned. So I am very skeptical about the Sunni front taking shape at all. As far as the GCC is concerned, there are several countries that are not supporting this agenda in Syria. So what are you really left with? You are left with a very serious divide between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Iran's agenda in Syria seems to have been bolstered, and there is now a very happy cohabitation between the Russians and the Iranians working together with Syria and Iraq. So you see the emergence of a new coalition that has just taken shape, that is just taking shape as we speak. So I'm not sure which way we are going to go as far as the GCC stroke Saudi agenda is concerned. I think it has had a very serious setback. This could prepare the ground for a certain engagement, for a possible engagement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Enough of this violence, enough of this bloodletting, enough of this sectarianism. Let us get together and talk to each other.
Well, for the sake of the Arab world, I hope you're proved right on that one. But Mr. Cholia, Dr. Cholia, so last quick point. Lots of countries in the region who were traditionally seen as America's friends, Iran, Israel for one, has now gone ahead in some kind of tacit approval of the Russian intervention. Israel's Prime Minister made a visit to Moscow, so have others. In fact, even John Kerry is on record to say that we are not looking at a regime change tomorrow or 1 month or later. What we are looking at, some kind of stability in the region before we can take the next set of steps. What's your take?
It is possible. I mean, it's always tantalizing in complex armed conflicts like that, that they may eventually reach a modus vivendi when they're all tired and they know that nobody can really win on the battlefield. But nonetheless, it is a matter of concern from the Russian and the Iranian point of view that the West tends to take a line that it's either my way or the highway, as in they want to dictate the terms of the settlement. And what Putin is essentially doing now is shaking up that prospect and saying, you cannot dictate it, it's got to be a compromise.
Interesting. As always, we've been quite enlightened by all the wisdom that's come in this room in this discussion, but clearly 3 or 4 points stand out. First is that this is probably the first time, if not in decades, at least some say even in a century, that the US and Russian troops have come so close to each other, not necessarily in ground ops, but right now they are in the air combat zone and each side has to clear airspace for the other to get on with its mission. But Russia's patience was clearly exhausted, having seen that the current so-called stalemate in the region was getting nowhere, and therefore Russia moved in, but not just to target the jihadis, as they say, or to prop up the Syrian regime as the world sees, but equally importantly, to strengthen its strategic claims in the region in the event of a bigger standoff between Russia and NATO, which Mr. Putin seems to be calculating on. But most importantly, this conflict has divided the Arab world across the middle, and the current Shia-Sunni divide has been at the heart of this conflict, but it could see, after a certain amount of exhaustion, a certain rapprochement between the Sunni-led regimes and Iran and its friends in the region. Most importantly, this conflict continues to be a conflict which has enormous humanitarian proportions, and the world is bearing the brunt of indecisiveness on the part of global powers in Syria. Thank you very much for being with us on this show, sir. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.